left beside her dead mother on the trail, the young girl wept. A silent hunter found her, and the raw, untamed wind, her only mourner, carried the sound away across the bloodrust canyons and skeletal trees. Elara, barely a woman, huddled against the cold, unyielding earth, her small hands clutching the worn fabric of her mother's dress, a dress now still as the prairie stone beneath it. The sun, a merciless eye in the vast, indifferent sky, beat down, baking the sorrow into the dust that coated her tear-streaked face. Each breath was a shard of glass, each beat of her heart a hammer against ribs too frail for such a burden. The silence of the plains was broken only by her own ragged gasps and the distant, mournful cry of a hawk circling overhead, a feathered sentinel in a world stripped bare of comfort. Her mother's face, pale and serene in a way it had not been for many months, was turned towards the endless horizon, as if seeking a peace that life had cruelly denied. Elara traced the line of her mother's jaw, a jaw that had once set with determination against hardship, now slackened in the final surrender. There were no words left, only a hollow ache that consumed her from within, a desolation as vast and empty as the land itself. How long had she been there? Hours? A lifetime? Time had fractured, shattered like a dropped looking glass, its pieces scattered among the thorny scrub and the whispering grasses. The wagon, its wheel broken, its meager contents looted by the same shadows that had stolen her mother's last breath, stood as a broken monument to their failed journey, a testament to dreams turned to dust. She did not look at it. She looked only at the still form, willing it to move, to speak, to offer one last word of guidance in this terrible, new silence. The air grew colder as the sun began its descent, painting the western sky in hues of violent purple and dying orange, a funeral pyre for the day. A shiver, born not just of the dropping temperature but of a primal fear, ran through her. Alone. The word was a branding iron, searing itself into her soul. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Then, a shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of the rock formations to the east. It moved with a predator's grace, silent, deliberate. Elara's breath hitched. She did not scream, her throat was a knot of unshed tears and terror. The figure resolved into a man, tall and lean, clad in buckskins the color of the dry earth. A rifle rested easy in the crook of his arm, his face obscured by the brim of a battered hat and the twilight's embrace. He stopped a respectful distance away, his presence a sudden, stark intrusion into her private agony. He surveyed the scene, the dead woman, the weeping girl, the broken wagon, his posture unchanging, unreadable. Was he another vulture, come to pick at the remains? Or something else? The wind soughed, carrying the scent of pine and something wilder, something of him. He said nothing. He simply watched, and in his watching, the world seemed to hold its breath. The hunter, Jedediah, took in the tableau of tragedy with eyes that had witnessed too much of death's artistry. The girl, small and trembling, was a broken bird beside her fallen dam. The sight clawed at something deep within him, a place he kept locked and barred, where the ghosts of his own losses resided. He saw not just a stranger's sorrow, but an echo of a pain so profound it had scoured him hollow, leaving behind only this shell of a man who moved through the wilderness like a phantom. His first instinct, honed by years of solitude and survival, was to turn, to melt back into the landscape that was his only true companion. What was this to him? Another mouth, another burden, another heart to potentially break, or be broken by. Yet, he did not move. The girl's quiet sobs, raw and unperformative, snagged on the rough edges of his callous soul. He saw the faint flutter of her pulse at the base of her throat, a fragile testament to the life that still flickered within her, a life teetering on the precipice of utter despair. His gaze shifted to the deceased woman. Her face, though etched with hardship, bore a resemblance to someone he had tried for years to forget, a face that haunted his dreams, superimposed over the crackling flames of his lonely cook fires. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the phantom ache of arms that had once held and lost. He said nothing. Words were a currency he no longer traded in. Instead, he unslung a worn spade from his pack-horse, which had followed him with an equally silent tread. The metallic scrape of the tool against the rocky soil was the first sound to break the girl's vigil. She flinched, her eyes, wide and luminous with fear and grief, finally lifting to meet his shadowed face. He chose a spot a little way from the trail, beneath the meager shelter of a stunted juniper. The digging was hard, the ground unforgiving, but his movements were economical, powerful. He worked with a grim determination, the setting sun casting his long shadow over the makeshift grave. Ilara watched, a silent, uncomprehending witness. When it was done, deep enough to deter the scavengers of the night, he gently, almost reverently, lifted the mother's body. For a moment, Ilara thought to protest, to cling, but a strange paralysis held her. He laid the woman to rest, folding her hands upon her chest. He found a flat piece of sandstone and, with the tip of his hunting knife, slowly, laboriously, scratched a simple cross into its surface. No prayers were offered, no eulogies spoken. The act itself was the only sermon. Then, he turned to Ilara. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, finally met hers fully. They held no pity, no softness, only a stark, unyielding reality. He gestured with his chin towards his pack-horse. "Come," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse, like stones grinding together. It was not a request. Ilara, numb and adrift, found her legs moving, carrying her away from the only anchor she had known, towards an unknown, silent protector. The journey to his cabin was a blur of swaying motion, the chill night air, and the overwhelming presence of the silent man leading the way. The cabin, when they reached it deep in a wooded hollow, was as stark and unyielding as the man himself. Hewn from rough logs, chinked with mud and moss, it seemed to grow from the earth rather than sit upon it. Smoke, a thin, grey ribbon, curled from a stone chimney, promising a modicum of warmth against the encroaching cold of the high country night. Jedediah dismounted, his movements economical, and without a word, lifted Ilara from the pack-horse. Her legs, stiff and unused to such travel, nearly buckled, but his grip, surprisingly steady, held her upright for a moment before releasing her. Inside, the cabin was a single room, dominated by a large stone hearth where embers glowed faintly. A rough-hewn table and 2 stools, a narrow cot covered with furs in one corner, and shelves holding a few necessities were the only furnishings. The air smelled of wood smoke, pine resin, and old solitude. Jedediah moved with practiced ease, adding logs to the fire until it blazed, pushing back the shadows and the chill. He ladled stew from a pot suspended over the embers into a wooden bowl, placing it on the table with a hunk of dark bread. "Eat," he commanded, his voice still that gravelly rasp. Ilara, though her stomach was a tight knot of grief, found herself obeying. The food was simple, hearty, and as she ate, a measure of warmth spread through her, a small, fragile thing in the vast emptiness within. He ate standing, watching the fire, his back to her. The silence in the cabin was thick, broken only by the crackle of the flames and the soft sounds of her eating. It was not an uncomfortable silence, not entirely. It was a silence that acknowledged the enormity of what had passed, a silence that did not demand explanation or false comfort. Days bled into weeks. Jedediah followed a rhythm dictated by the seasons and the needs of survival. He hunted, trapped, chopped wood, his movements precise, his energy boundless. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was in short, functional phrases. Yet, his actions spoke volumes. He mended the sole of her worn-out boot with a piece of cured leather, his large hands surprisingly deft. He left a small, intricately carved wooden bird on the table one morning, its form so lifelike she could almost hear its song. He never acknowledged these small kindnesses, just as he never acknowledged her tentative attempts to help, sweeping the packed earth floor with a branch broom, mending a tear in his buckskin shirt with thread pulled from her own tattered petticoat, her stitches small and neat. She learned to read the shift of his shoulders, the set of his jaw, the flicker in his grey eyes. She saw the way he would sometimes pause by the small, crudely marked grave he'd made for her mother before heading out, his hat held in his hands, his head bowed for a moment that stretched into an eternity. One afternoon, while tidying the rough shelves, her fingers brushed against something soft hidden beneath a pile of cured hides. It was a child's rag doll, its yarn hair faded, one button eye missing. Beside it, a small, intricately beaded moccasin, no bigger than her hand. A wave of understanding, profound and sorrowful, washed over her. His silence was not emptiness, but a vessel overflowing with unspoken grief. She carefully replaced the items, her heart aching with a shared, invisible wound. The cabin, once a symbol of his isolation, began to feel like a fragile sanctuary. The fire in the hearth was no longer just for warmth, but a beacon against the encroaching darkness, both outside and within. The autumn deepened, its colors flaring like a final, defiant bonfire before the onset of winter. The wind began to carry a sharper bite, and the sky often wore a bruised, heavy look. Jedediah worked with a relentless urgency, stockpiling wood, securing the cabin against the coming storms. Elara, now more attuned to the rhythms of the wilderness and the man who moved within it, found herself watching the horizon with a sense of unease. The animals, too, seemed restless, squirrels chattered with frantic energy, and the deer moved to lower elevations earlier than usual. Foreshadowing lay heavy in the air, thick as the scent of pine and damp earth. One morning, they awoke to a world transformed. Snow, thick and relentless, fell from a leaden sky, driven by a howling wind that clawed at the cabin like a hungry beast. The world outside the small, grime-streaked window was a swirling vortex of white. The blizzard had arrived, not with subtlety, but with a primal fury that shook the very foundations of their precarious existence. Jedediah, after a brief, grim assessment of the storm's intensity, said only, "Stay inside. Keep the fire." He spent the day checking the seals around the door and window, reinforcing a loose shutter that banged like a frantic drum against the logs. The wind shrieked, a chorus of tormented spirits, and the snow piled in great drifts against the walls. The familiar sounds of the forest were obliterated, replaced by the storm's monstrous voice. Fear, a cold serpent, coiled in Elara's stomach, but watching Jedediah's methodical preparations, his calm amidst the chaos, offered a sliver of reassurance. As night fell, the storm intensified. The temperature plummeted. Despite the roaring fire, a biting chill seeped into the cabin. They ate their meager meal in silence, the howl of the wind a constant, oppressive presence. Later, as Elara lay on her cot, pretending to sleep, she heard a muffled thud from outside, followed by a low groan. Jedediah had gone out to secure the lean-to where he kept his precious firewood, fearing the weight of the snow might collapse it. Panic seized her. She threw off her furs and unlatched the door, the wind tearing it from her grasp and slamming it open, filling the cabin with a maelstrom of snow and freezing air. She saw him then, a dark shape struggling in the white chaos, one hand pressed to his side, his face contorted in pain. He had slipped on the ice hidden beneath the fresh snow, and a heavy log, dislodged by his fall, had struck him. He stumbled back inside, leaning heavily against the doorframe, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The wood he managed, his voice strained, almost gone from the lean-to. He sank to the floor, a dark stain spreading on his buckskin shirt near his ribs. The protector was wounded. The carefully constructed wall of his stoicism had cracked. Elara, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a fierce, protective urgency, rushed to his side. "Let me see," she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady. The wound was ugly, a deep gash already purpling at the edges. With trembling hands, she fetched water, tore strips from her cleanest petticoat for bandages. As she cleaned the wound, her touch gentle but firm, he watched her, his grey eyes clouded with pain and something else, a vulnerability she had never seen. "My wife. Sarah. And little Tom," he rasped, the words torn from him by fever or the storm's fury, or perhaps the simple, profound relief of a dam finally breaking. "Lost them to the fever, spring of '72. This place, it was meant to be our start." His eyes closed, a single tear escaping to trace a path through the grime on his cheek. Elara's own tears welled. She said nothing of her mother, of the trail, of her own desolation. Her shared silence, her steady hands tending his wound, spoke more than words ever could. The storm raged outside, but within the small cabin, a different kind of tempest was subsiding, leaving behind a raw, aching, but undeniably shared humanity. The blizzard raged for 3 days and 3 nights, an unrelenting assault that tested the limits of their endurance and the cabin's resilience. Elara tended to Jedediah, her fear a constant companion, yet her resolve solidified with each passing hour. She kept the fire fed with the last of the wood he'd managed to drag inside before his collapse, rationing it carefully. She melted snow for water, coaxed sips of weak broth between his fever-chapped lips. His words about Sarah and Tom hung in the air, echoes of a life extinguished, yet in their utterance, a seed of connection had been planted between them. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring names, sometimes thrashing against an unseen enemy. In his lucid moments, his eyes would find hers, filled with a raw gratitude that needed no voice. She spoke to him softly then, not of her own sorrows, but of small, inconsequential things, the pattern of the frost on the windowpane, the way the wind sounded like a distant ocean, anything to anchor him to the present, to the fight for survival. On the fourth morning, the wind died. An eerie silence descended, broken only by the drip of melting snow from the eaves. Elara, exhausted but alert, pulled back the rough blanket covering the window. The world was a breathtaking expanse of white, sculpted by the storm into fantastical shapes, sparkling under a pale, hesitant sun. The fury had passed. Jedediah stirred, his fever broken. He was weak, his face drawn, but his eyes were clear. He looked at Elara, truly looked at her, and a flicker of something akin to wonder softened his harsh features. "You stayed," he whispered, his voice weak but clear. "You saved me," she merely nodded, a small, shy smile touching her lips. "We saved each other," she replied softly, the first full sentence she had offered him that was not a simple answer to a direct question. The days that followed were filled with the quiet industry of recovery and repair. The roof had held, but drifts needed clearing, and the wood supply was dangerously low. Jedediah, though still mending, directed her, his instructions patient, his praise unspoken but evident in the slight upturn of his lips when she managed a difficult task. They worked together, a silent rhythm re-establishing itself, but it was different now. The silence was no longer born of caution or grief, but of a shared understanding, a comfortable companionship. He taught her to set snares, to identify edible roots even under the snow. She, in turn, showed him how her mother had used certain herbs to soothe coughs, her knowledge surprising him. One evening, as the fire cast dancing shadows on the walls, Jedediah picked up the small wooden bird he had carved and, after a moment's hesitation, held it out to her. "For you," he said. "To remember that even in winter, there's life." Elara took it, her fingers tracing its smooth, delicate lines. It was more than a gift, it was an offering, a bridge across the chasm of their pasts. The cabin, once a hermitage of sorrow, began to feel like a home. The hearth was no longer just a source of heat but the heart of their shared existence. The wounds, both seen and unseen, were beginning to scar over, not in erasure, but in acceptance. A quiet peace settled over them, fragile as the first spring thaw, but undeniably real. The future remained unwritten, a vast, snow-covered wilderness, but now, they would face it together, two souls no longer adrift, but anchored by a bond forged in loss, and tempered by the promise of a quiet, shared dawn. Their story, like so many whispered on the winds of the Old West, speaks of the resilience of the human spirit, the unexpected solace found in shared silence, and the redemptive power of simple kindness. It reminds us that even in the deepest desolation, amidst the harshest trials, the seeds of hope can take root and blossom into something strong, something beautiful. Jedediah and Elara, two souls scarred by loss, found in each other not a replacement for what was gone, but a new reason to build, to trust, to live. Their quiet homestead became a testament to the enduring strength found when one heart, however broken, reaches out to another. Perhaps their journey echoes a truth within your own life, a moment where compassion carved a path through sorrow, or where silent understanding spoke louder than any words. These are the stories that connect us, that remind us of our shared capacity for healing and love. If their quiet courage and the fragile bloom of their unlikely bond have touched your heart, we invite you to join our community. Subscribe to our channel, and let us continue to explore these timeless tales of human connection, redemption, and the enduring power of hope. For in every shared story, we find a piece of ourselves, and together, we keep the fire of these essential human values burning bright.